we set up Rooted, which was a week of working with amazing people to really look at what's in the way in making confident and competent decisions around your own health. So thank you for coming along, and we're a very tiny audience, so it's going to be a very intimate time. But we've invited you because we want to hear your voices in this debate and about what's needed to keep our communities healthy and well. Thank you, panel, for coming along to share your personal thoughts, your perspectives and your expertise, all of which we really welcome tonight. And yeah, I just want to say thank you for your openness and your courage in sitting where you are and standing by what you think. It's not easy. It's a very complex conversation to be having. But I just want to assure you that you are in a place of respect and care and understanding, and everybody's going to reflect that back to you today. We're here to share perspectives on something that is complex in strange ways. It's deeply personal and individual, and at the same time, it connects us all, reminding us of our dependencies on each other and our reliance on governments and systems to look after us. Personally, we're juggling lots of fears. There's lots of information, there's lots of misinformation, and the daily impact of COVID on our lives and how we live and how we care for ourselves and our families. It's a lot to manage, and it's a lot to kind of get clear on. Locally, we feel that impact of disruption in our school life and works and shops and services, and globally we recognise that our suffering is actually shared by millions of people around the globe, many of whom don't have access to free healthcare or any healthcare at all easily. So let's share our thoughts and our hopes and our inspirations, really, for how we can adapt and look after ourselves and each other better. What do we need to overcome those fears, or to even understand those fears and where they're coming from? Do we need to recenter our trust? Where is that sitting at the moment? It's difficult. And what choices might we be making differently that support our bodies, our communities and our cultures? So I'm going to do a quick intro of everybody here. I've just realised the right piece of paper is at the other end of the table. Okay, so from the top, Pamela Toro. Pamela is a marketing professional. She's a digital content creator, a writer, and she's passionate about empowering the younger generation from South London by increasing their opportunities. And she's, last year, she founded a CIC, community interest company, called Decolonise Networking, and Pamela was one of our Rooted course participants. Rihánna, Guthrie-Blake. Rihánna is a young creative professional currently working as marketing communications assistant with the Brixton bid. Rihánna was also a Rooted participant. Lizzie, another Rooted participant, is a creative artist who is always finding new mediums to express herself and the views of the world around her. Shortly after completing university, Lizzie fell unwell with a chronic illness which causes extreme pelvic inflammation, chronic migraines and fatigue. Lizzie was also a Rooted course participant. Then we have Zainab Saeed. Zainab is an immunologist currently studying for a PhD at Imperial College London. She's investigating COVID-19 immunity in pregnancy, including the impact of the vaccine. Zainab holds a Master's in Immunology from Imperial and Biomedical Science degree from King's College London. Afrin Ahmed. Afrin is a recent graduate from Edinburgh University studying social anthropology and politics. She's been involved in student activism through support for running the Scottish Anti-Racist Conference, heading the university's Feminist Society and collaborating with other professors and students in her final year to create the first race and decolonial studies class at the university. Since graduating and moving back to London, Afrin has been working with a health and wellbeing startup and volunteers as an anti-canceral feminist magazine. Casserole, yeah. Yeah, I don't know why I haven't got my glasses on, I'm so sorry. Which works to support women in prisons. Yemi Akingbade. Yem is a fashion designer and has her own women's wear range, Yemzi. She's also an art direction student at the School of Communication Arts and the mother of a 2-year-old. So everybody here is here because they have a particular perspective, a particular interest to share. So thank you all for coming and for being here. I'm going to go back to our first question. What do we need? What do we need to overcome fear? Now maybe I'm making a huge assumption here that people actually feel fear about the vaccine or about COVID indeed. Maybe we feel it's just like flu. I don't know, I'm not going to make that assumption. But who perhaps would like to kick off from that aspect of fear? Anyone on the panel like to take that one as a starting point?
Can you repeat it?
Yes, I will. What do we need to overcome fear? That's the first part of the question, and to be able to recenter our trust is the second part of that.
I can have a go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think. Thanks. So I think in trying to understand what you can do about the fear of like vaccine hesitancy, and I think it is a thing that a lot of people and young people feel at the moment. I know it's the biggest reason why ethnic minorities aren't getting the vaccine, and so I think I can speak from that perspective. Not that I have that perspective, but just to like inform what that fear is. I think a lot of it is to do with the lack of institutional trust, and because for a lot of these people who maybe are hesitant or fearful, it stems out of what relationship do these institutions have with people, and a lot of it is quite harmful. Like especially over the pandemic, it's just really obvious. Like a lot of inequality that's always existed has like come to the fore even more, and so I think it's difficult to and kind of unfair to pin that hesitancy as like lack of information or not being like not understanding science or anything like that. I think it predominantly comes from like the actions of and like the outcome of like institutional discrimination. I think even at the start of the pandemic, my granddad was ill, and in the area that he lives is predominantly South Asians, and so I think for that reason a lot of their like medical issues, or not for that reason but just GPs in like predominantly ethnic minority areas can like underplay people's medical issues. And actually it was only because my granddad had like 8 kids who could pool together money to get him private healthcare that he was able to get an accurate diagnosis. And so that kick-starting I don't know, March 2020, it just kind of demonstrates the relationship that a lot of people of colour have with like medical institutions and healthcare. And so I think it's really important to like contextualise it. Yeah, so that's my answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Afrin. That's great. Zainab, I see you writing away. Is there any response you'd like to make to that as a starting point?
Yeah. Hi. So I think one of the things, so there's a few things I wanted to discuss, but like one thing I know you said, maybe the lack of understanding science may not be a factor. As a scientist, like part of what I would like to do is be able to communicate what we do in a way that people understand. And I think we've become a lot better at it because of the pandemic and understanding that, you know, people don't necessarily just trust that vaccines are good for you because we said so. So I do think there's a lack of understanding, and it's not like it's no one's fault. It's more just that I think as scientists, as people who should be communicating science, I think we haven't done actually a very good job at it. You know, using fancy words, using this and that, it doesn't mean anything because, you know, why do we really fear vaccines? We have to like start to understand. And I also agree with you, I agree that, you know, there is a kind of that relationship with whether it's like medical institutions or government, it's quite strained at the moment, so that people just naturally also don't trust scientists. So I think that's where we kind of need to come in and make that distinction. You know, you can still not agree with some of the policies that the government does, and you can still have, you know, a bit of a mistrust with pharmaceutical companies, but then how do scientists, just everyday people who, you know, going to work and like we genuinely just want to understand what is happening in your body, how can we create these vaccines to help you guys, how do we then communicate and build on that relationship? And I think in terms of kind of like the first question of overcoming fears, for us it's, you know, for me it's building infrastructures that will help everyone. So it's putting measures like making sure people are vaccinated, people understand why they should be taking the vaccine, what's in your vaccine, you know, having those conversations, being really transparent about it, and encouraging people to do it, especially, as you said, like the ethnic minorities. Like, again, I'm someone from a South Asian background as well, so we've seen like there is generally like a mistrust, like people from like kind of ethnic backgrounds, like we've been affected the worst with COVID, and it's been the worst kind of uptake of vaccines. So, you know, we do need to do something. We need to like find out how can we communicate with our, like sometimes with our own communities, and build on that relationship. How, like, you know, so it's really, I think it comes down to like asking questions, like what is your fear? Why, you know, why do you not trust this? Is there anything that we can do? So can we like build on it by giving you information, and doing like more outreach programs and things like that. So I think that's kind of, you know, that's my perspective on it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, both of you. That's a really good way for us to kick off. You both said a lot, and I think what I am picking up from that is there is a communication issue, but we still have this thing that underlying that communication, we can be communicating with people, and yeah, I'm sure you've got stuff to say around that. But before we get to that, there is still something that we need to understand as to what is this mistrust seated on? Rihánna. That was your procedure.
Yeah.
And that wasn't it.
In relation to what was said earlier, I agree that there is a lot of institutional mistrust, and I feel like that stems from like inconsistencies throughout time when it comes to like healthcare and yeah, just stuff related to people's health. Because like, especially for ethnic minorities as well, there have been a lot of examples where we have been trusting of institutions, and then it's been misplaced trust, and people have got hurt, or there's been a lot of long-term effects, like for example the Tuskegee experiments, and with the thalidomide, and then babies were born with defects and stuff like that. So as much as we want to be trusting of who's in, well, I guess not who's in charge of our health, but the government and all these institutions, obviously an increase, like I said, of consistency when it comes to these things would probably lead to more trust. And in the cases of, so when it comes to the vaccine and everything, isn't it usually that there's, I don't know, like a 10-year process when it comes to creating vaccines and stuff like that? And as much as during COVID it was, presented as a really great feat that the vaccine was created quickly, to some people that's going to come across as a red flag, because if usually it takes 10 years and now all of a sudden it's taken a couple of months, that's great for rollout and everything, but probably a lot of people would feel like we're going to be the first batch of, I guess, experiments or long-term data cases. So if there's no long-term data presently in terms of, the effects and how this is going to affect everyone and potentially the other generations, then I don't feel like a lot of people are going to be very forthcoming, and to be honest, it's quite understandable if that's the case. And in terms of, I feel like in terms of the ethnic minorities potentially being more affected by COVID, that could be down to a host of different things, because especially in terms of how different cultures eat and everything, apparently a lot of ethnic minorities are kind of well, at least in the Caribbean community, where a lot of us are predisposed to diabetes and stuff like that. And stuff like that isn't just, you were born with diabetes. A lot of it is to do with our lifestyles and how we eat and everything. And if those factors are already a bit iffy from before we were even ill, then of course then our immune systems are potentially going to be not where they should be. And then to get ill on top of that, it's not really logical to expect that you are going to be combating everything as you should, or as you would have been if your health was, I guess, at a better point basically. And I know a lot of factors affect our health, not just having a predisposed condition and stuff like that. So it's a bit tricky to say if you were healthy everything would have been fine, but yeah. And to be honest, a lot of the community are kind of reverting back to traditional methods of health and well-being anyway. So I feel that that's probably also linking to why there's not necessarily a hesitancy, but a choice of not deciding to take the vaccine, or not deciding always to go to institutional medical professionals, as opposed to more holistic and traditional approaches.
Thank you, Rihánna. There was a lot in there. There was a lot of scribbling from this corner over here. I know.
Sorry, I was scribbling right.
Yes, I'm going to go to Zainab first. Oh, Lizzie, do you want to step in with that one?
I just wanted to say that I feel like going on from Rihánna's point is that we're all we're all so different, as human beings, and we're not all going to respond the same way to a vaccine. And I kind of feel like there's been a lot that's been not really shown on mainstream media about people having reactions to the vaccine, and that it has actually made people more sick. And I do think that an answer to this, or not an answer, but I think it would be better if we just respected everyone's choice about whether or not they wanted to get the vaccine or not. Because ultimately, I do think we intuitively know within ourselves what the right choice would be for us. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, obviously I'm very happy that you feel that your intuition is in a place where you can make that decision competently. That's what the week was about, that's what the course was about. I think where it becomes complicated, however, is the multi-layers of responsibility. So we have a responsibility obviously to care for ourselves and for our immediate family, and then there's been a lot of pressure around kind of how are you being responsible for what happens in your community, and then what happens across the world, you know, when it gets to the point, well, and I think several scientists say, don't they, the only way to overcome it is if everybody has a vaccine. So that's when it becomes very complicated, and even if you are making a competence decision for yourself, the pressure is still evident, you know. It puts you in a position that you may not feel or be deserving of. So that's a thing that we need to kind of understand, I think, differently. How do we hold these multiple complex needs to do it or to not do it in a world where we are also trying to make sure that communities are healthy and well supported. I do want to come back to Rihánna shortly about diet and nutrition. I think that's a really interesting road to go down. But right now I'd like to hear from Yen, please, because we've begun to talk about the role of the media. As Lizzie was saying, there are multiple different stories out there which tell a different truth to what we might receive or what lots of people might receive through the news. It's very difficult again, you know, it's all so subjective, isn't it?
Yeah, for me, this is on?
Yeah.
So I'm an art direction student actually in this building, and I've been studying that since September, so I'm new to it, but it's interesting to actually be on the other side rather than being someone that's reading the paper but thinking about headlines that will capture people's interest and attention. And we have a famous art director that we're learning from called Alex Taylor, and she creates all the, she did create all the advertising for the Royal Army, the Royal Navy and all of that, and it's just amazing that like your thought can actually change a country, actually it could be the difference of life or death for so many people, and there's advertising that's going to encourage like a 15-year-old boy to join the army. And for me personally, actually I'm not going to go down that route. But yeah, it's just amazing like what the media can do and how you can convince people. For me, when I started getting texts from the NHS like every day asking me to get the vaccine, that was putting me off getting it even more. I just felt bombarded, and I feel like I would have preferred to have some sort of conversation before being told like, get your jab, we've got a space today, we've got this. It's just like, it feels like so much pressure. I'm around people that have this shared opinion that it's a communal thing, that by you doing it, it's not just about your life, but you're making sure that everyone around you is safe as well. And I feel like there was way too much pressure for people to get vaccines. And I work as a freelancer, as a designer, and also as an art director. So I'm around a lot of other freelancers, and so many of my friends had to get the vaccine in order to continue working. So yeah, from my perspective, communication plays a big role, and I feel like people currently are less fearful of COVID because the attention in the media has gone elsewhere to other crazy things that are happening in the world. So for me personally, I will say I took my chances. I got COVID in July. I was actually surprised. I was celebrating my birthday, and I had a COVID test for some work I was doing, so we have to make sure that we don't have it in order to be on set. And they said to me that you've got COVID, you can't come back for the date. And I was really surprised, and then as the days went on, I started to feel really, really ill. But I still decided that I wasn't going to get the vaccination, and to this day I haven't. My daughter also doesn't, well, she's 2, so probably they haven't like offered 2-year-olds jabbed yet. But for other vaccinations, she's had them all. I've not had an issue with that, but like you were saying, this whole thing of it takes this many years to get an actual, how do you say, like an approved formulation to make sure, and all of a sudden it just went through quick, and I've just felt that that's a bit too fast for me, and I definitely don't want to be a guinea pig. And I actually met someone who works in this field, and he said, he's like a scientist from your perspective, he said that in his office it was 50-50. Some people were saying that it's too fast, and other people were saying yeah. So even within the institutions where they do the research, not everyone was agreeing with the same direction. So yeah, that's my perspective.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm just going to come back to Zainab and then I'll come to you. Zainab, there's quite a lot for you to pick up on there. I don't want to be working you too hard.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I think the main thing that's come up is obviously the 10-year process, and so I'll talk about that a little bit. Normally, when you decide, okay, we're going to try and create a vaccine or we're going to try and create a drug, you have 15 or 20 people in a lab. I mean, this is a big lab. My lab has like 3 people. So, I mean, just my little group has like 3 people. But, 15, 20, let's say 50. This is a huge now lab. And you're working together, you're going to do all these experiments. So there's quite a lot that goes into creating a vaccine. You have your preclinical phases. So I won't go into the science too much, but there's a preclinical phase where you identify what you're going to create the vaccine for. So in this case, the spike protein, because that's what you want your body to kind of identify. Then you have the phase where we get to test on a very small group of people to see, how do we test this, what happens when people take it. Then these become into like larger groups. Then you have people who haven't been given the placebo groups, and then eventually you get to the phase where like you can actually trial it out and people have it. And this is why it takes such a long time, because there are a lot of experiments that go into from the first point to the last point. And whilst you're doing it, you're constantly monitoring, why, like anything, like literally like from I had a weird rash to I had a headache to like I didn't feel like eating that day. So the people who are in the trials, they're noting down everything, and you're supposed to look at it, and anything that gets flagged up, if it's anything serious, the thing gets shut down. There's a whole body that comes in, they investigate, is this related to the vaccine? If it's a yes, you stop, you modify it, you go back to it. If it's a no, then you carry on. So this is why it takes such a long time. Now, why did it take a year? Because you have essentially the world's best scientists across now the world, not one lab, not one country, in like literally throughout the world, who were collectively working on creating like the vaccine. And that is why it's been so quick. It's not because it's rushed, but not rushed in the sense that safety was compromised. It was just rushed because you had a lot of people working on it. For the first, even as scientists, like obviously we want to be like the first one who discovers something, or the first one. We don't constantly share our research for a while till you have enough that you can share and get credibility. This is one of the first times where as soon as someone was figuring something out, they were putting it out there. They were like, hey, we got this, we know this X amount about the virus, and then there's another lab in, like across the world who's like, hey, I can create this very quickly. So this is how it was done. And also, like, it's worth remembering, none of this stuff is new. Like, we've been creating vaccines. None of the research is new. It's just been modified to COVID and SARS. And there's actually groups across the world who were working on SARS previously, or MERS. So they just had to modify it slightly to work on this particular strain. So you had a lot of manpower, a lot of money, a lot of brains like doing it. So just an example of like AstraZeneca, I think in the phase 2 trials, just in the UK alone, it was tested, I think, on 18,800 people to see, and everybody in that again they went through side effects, everything. It was also given, the similar, I think it was about 19,000 or so people were given the placebo, so like saline. That's a lot of people in just like a phase 2. So it's not that it wasn't tested, they also tested the same vaccines across different countries to see if it makes a difference depending on your ethnicity and things like that. So I mean, in terms of safety, there's a lot that has been done. The point about, we're all different, agreed, we are all different, which is why people can have side effects. We cannot create something and then think that it won't have a side effect. You can take paracetamol. If everyone in the world is to take 2 pills of paracetamol, there are going to be people who are going to react to that and not be very well. So we can't create something that doesn't have side effects. Sorry, it's me making way. So we do have different responses, and that's actually why we study the immune system. So like part of my research is to look at, like if you're pregnant, do you have the same type of immunity when you get COVID, or do you have the same immunity when you get the vaccine? And because you have such a variation between so many different people, one person is not going to be the same as the other. But that's why we study so many different people, so many different ethnicities. If you have someone of South Asian background, we have to then have controls that are also of the same ethnicity, same gender, so same age groups. So so a lot of research actually goes into planning like all of this. I feel like I could go on, but I think I'm going to pass it on.
Yeah, come back. I'm going to try and not make horrible noise. I'll stand right over here. Stand here, okay. Stand here. Thank you, Zainab. I do actually feel like you've probably given us more information in that 5 minutes, or a better sense of the process in that 5 minutes than certainly I was aware of. And I know personally I find that really helpful. Just to come back to you on the words that you spoke, which I think did the thing really eloquently, which is taken from your really very personal experience and your care for your little one, and that decision-making process through to kind of how the global communication engine works in quite insidious ways. You didn't have to say it, but we kind of got the drift of where you might have been going with that. It's really, really very complicated, and I think if we move to the aspect of how, because we're trying to come up with some level of solutions, thoughts, ways forward in this, then I'm interested in Rihánna's points around self-organised care. That sounds really good. Yeah, I'd really like you to think about the communication machine. I'm not going to come back to you immediately, just think about it for a little bit and think about what might be able to happen there. And Zainab, also, if you want to just think about what you would like to see happen in the way that science is being communicated. Lizzie, over to you. Well, there's a little thinking engine going on here. Do you want to go? Yeah, if you want to go back to that point.
So, are we talking about kind of ways forward? Or?
Yeah, you were about to make a point, so
yeah.
I just wanted to hear your point.
I just a few questions popped into my mind, but and the things that I've been thinking about is it really necessary to vaccinate everybody? Is it really necessary for a healthy 18-year-old with a really good system to deal with COVID? Is it really, do they need the vaccine? Because there's quite a lot of people who can have COVID and will be okay. And I kind of feel like I can completely appreciate what you're saying about some people definitely probably needing to have that extra protection and having the vaccine. But I just kind of feel like kind of what you were saying about being pushed to have it and getting all of those texts and just feeling like like I can't live my life if I don't get the vaccine. I just felt like that was, and also the kind of guilt trip of like, oh, you must get the vaccine because you need to protect everyone else, when actually there's been lots of people who had the vaccine and passed COVID on, so that was completely irrelevant. So yeah, those are just the points that I wanted to make. And in response to your question of how do we move forward, I do really think it's just about respecting people's choices. If they want to get the vaccine, if they don't want to get the vaccine, and not pushing people, because I feel like that can feel quite intense and like an attack. And I don't really feel like that's being talked about, or people feel like they can talk about it, especially with people who have had the vaccine and are quite like, you must get the vaccine, you know, like pushy about it.
So in a sense, the communication strategy has worked against vaccine uptake?
Yeah.
In as much as it's been so pushy and what's the word? Finger pointing. That's not a word, but anyway, I do know. Finger pointing, that has created a level of, that also has created a level of resistance, as well as all of the other things. It's another level.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So,
Can I respond?
yes, of course. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that, you know, I think it can be understandable why, if you're a young and healthy person, this like pressure coming from the government to do something that you're hesitant about. Like, I can understand why that's uncomfortable and why that's not effective. And I don't think that institutional pressure works, but I think the way that the vaccine is like presented to people, like splits people in those who maybe feel quite anxious, maybe because they're around a lot of vulnerable people, and people who are more like hesitant about the vaccine. And I think it can be quite polarizing. And even, I would say I've done a lot of work to try to understand people who are more hesitant about the vaccine, because lots of people I know were like hospitalized or had really serious experiences with COVID, and so I think fear is a large part of that pressure, especially when you feel like it's a community effort. This is like, vaccines help in a non-individualistic way because they benefit sometimes other people more than you, and so I can understand how that like might not, I don't know, yeah, but I do agree that like institutional pressure doesn't work, and I think that, I don't know, I think maybe that pressure stems out of fear for a lot of people as well. Not that it's effective, but sometimes it's easy to like fall into that, and rather I think probably the better way to go about it is to have more dialogue and nuance, and instead of categorize people based on whether they have a vaccine or not, looking at really like what are the reasons and trying to have a sense of empathy and understanding for those reasons. And I think that's more the perspective that I've come from, just trying to like at first being really confused and like not super understanding why people wouldn't get the vaccine, especially when you're around a lot of vulnerable people. That can feel like the only way forward, to now just trying to understand like that perspective a little more. I don't know if that's completely unrelated, but I think that pressure also comes from like fear for people. Yeah.
Thank you. Rihánna.
Yeah, just in response to what you and Lizzie were saying, I think they would definitely help if there was more transparency. So similarly to what you were saying, Lizzie, like in the same way that we're disclosing how many people have either died or just caught COVID, and stats like that, I feel like it should be disclosed how many people have been either negatively affected or died after taking the vaccine, because then a lot of people would then feel like they have a bit more of an informed choice about, I guess, what could or might happen if they take it. Likewise, with having more transparency in terms of what's in the vaccine and the process behind creating it and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't agree that this whole institutional pressure is helpful at all, or the way that they're advertising or communicating everything, because no other vaccine or medical innovations or methods are being overly persuaded like this, and to the point where you're feeling like you're being blackmailed or penalised if you don't take it, or like you're being punished. And when you think about it, a lot of people, if that's how they're feeling, are not going to be thinking that this is something that I should take that is good, because nothing that is good are you needing to be overly persuaded by to participate in. So yeah, so that's obviously going to come across as, you know, like another red flag. And potentially, if, for example, like obviously this is worst case scenario, but like if in the long term, like there were a decent amount of long term side effects for those who have taken the vaccine, then who then are we even able to be holding accountable for that? Especially if, like, for example, especially in the medical profession, the whole point is like to do no harm. So that if that's the case, then that's just going to cause another cycle of mistrust, and again, not only in, for example, the ethnic community, but just globally now, because yeah, now COVID is a whole global thing. And as much as people are saying that, you know, they're open to taking the vaccine, or like you said, Lizzie, they're not feeling, or you've got the other hand of people who are saying, maybe if you're healthy or if there's nothing wrong with me, why do I need to take it? I feel like it shouldn't be a thing where you're even having to justify yourself on what you do or don't do, because outside of vaccine and I guess all of the stuff that's happening, I guess, in present day, like our rights and autonomy over our bodies aren't even questioned. So I don't feel like now with this that it should be something that's brought into question, especially when we're getting a lot of people who are even reporting it like indirectly or directly, saying that after they've taken the vaccine they feel like their immunity has been lowered, or they've noticed that I feel in fact kind of worse than how I did before. Like, it's all kind of concerning. And again, especially when like no one should be kind of questioning you about what you do or what in life. So
thank you, Rihánna. As ever, you're on point. There's, you know, this is a very big conversation, and I don't want to keep coming back to you, Zainab, but I will come back to you in just a minute. I just want to kind of sum up some of what's been said here. I think the what I'm sort of getting, and tell me if it's wrong, but there is a sense that actually nobody knows. And even with what you're saying, you are also acknowledging that there is a level at which nobody can yet know, and there is amazing effort going into finding out and to exploring and all the rest of it. But we are in fact perhaps in an experiment. No, okay. Okay, now I'm being controversial. But if we were to look at it as an experiment, okay, so if we were to say, okay, we have to have some level of response, we don't quite know, we can't say from this position that this is the right response, but we're going to try it anyway because it's our best hope at the moment. Would that be a more honest position to be in, number one? And would that change perhaps the way people are able to approach it? By saying, well, yeah, I'll give myself up for an experiment and see what happens, and I'll look at how I feel, and I'll report back on how I feel. And would that actually give people a different way to approach it and therefore take away some of the barriers to resistance? Now back to you.
So the question of, and you know, are we in an experiment? So for me, the answer. So for me, the answer is no, because the people who volunteered to be in the trial were in the experiment, and there are, you know, a lot of people who went through these trials, and we're talking, you know, many different vaccines.
Yes, please.
Sorry.
How long was the trials?
So they were
Was it over a period of 5, 6 years, 25 years?
But this is the thing. So this is the point that I was making before. The safety element has not been compromised. It's just that we've done it a lot quicker because we've tested more people across the world using thousands of scientists and thousands of studies, as opposed to a few people doing it in one go. Because if, you know, you were to, it's a bit like, you know, if you ask me right now to clean this entire room, it's going to take me much longer, but if we all do it together, it'll be much quicker than that, right? Because everyone's doing it together. So we're not so much, I don't think we are in an experiment. Also, typically, I think it's also really good to think about vaccines and pharmaceutical drugs slightly differently. Drugs are a bit different. Drugs do tend to have quite long-term effects as well. So, you know, that's why they take even longer, and they're actually tested in a different way. So quite often drugs are tested on animal models, then they move on to kind of first man trials, and then slowly they get moved on to like people, because we don't know what concentrations and things could affect. Vaccines are a little bit different, where you create something that's going to elicit an immune response. And the dosage and these things, obviously we don't know, and then, like I said, we test it on small people, like small groups of people, then it gets larger, and eventually they get rolled out. Typically, most vaccines tend to have a longer term effect. It's about 40 to 50 days, which is why everyone who was in a trial is actually, they're monitored for, you know, a couple of months after to make sure that they weren't getting any side effects. And you'll notice, like most people, even the people who've had very adverse, you know, reactions and have ended up in hospital after taking the vaccine, it wasn't a year after. It was very much like they took the vaccine, and within a week or so, within a few days, they were in a hospital because something happened. Because what typically happens in those guys is that they've taken the vaccine, the immune response has just gone a bit funny, didn't like it, usually creates like a storm of, you know, an attack, and you end up in a hospital, or, I mean, it's caused something in your body. So they tend to be quite quick adverse reactions. So we do know that if you're going to get something, you're probably going to get it within, I would say, like the first week, within 40 days at most. Which is why I don't think we're in an experiment, because I feel like there are a lot of people who signed up for it and they've gone through these clinical trials, and now we've come to it and we're saying, hey, we're rolling it out to you guys. You know, can you get an adverse reaction? Of course you can. We are all really different. I could take something and, you know, someone else could take something, one could end up in a hospital, but when we look at the data, we look at the probabilities, you are much more likely to end up in a hospital with COVID than you are with the vaccine. That is not to say that someone could not take the vaccine and not end up in a hospital, but you are much more likely to have it with actual COVID. So more people ended up in a hospital with that. In terms of being more transparent with information, I agree, we can, but I also, you know, we have to think about it from another perspective. If I'm coming up to you and I'm saying, you know, by the way, all the information about adverse reactions is all available online. If you literally type your vaccine adverse reactions, or you type, you know, how many people have had what, it's all listed. Anything that gets reported gets actually listed. So it is transparent. Should the government be telling you this? Should they be telling you this when you're making a decision? I don't know, because I have a mix. I'm very on the whole, like, you know, yes, you should be transparent. But at the same time, if I say to you, like, hey, I need you to drink this bottle of water, there is about a 20%, well actually it's not 20, it's like much less, but you know, this could end up, you could end up in a hospital if you drink it, but you're most likely going to be okay. But I think you should, you know, or you could end up with this. I think you're going, like, it might create more fear. You know, we're not talking about one person or two people, we're talking about like everyone across the world. I don't know, I feel like that would create more fear. But I also agree that we need to be transparent. That information needs to be out there so that if you are someone who is a bit hesitant, you should be able to go and check that information before you make a decision. So I don't think we should hide that. But I don't know if we openly like offer it. But if someone was to ask me a question, I would definitely answer it. I'd be like, yeah.
And I'm asking you, how long were
Can
the
I
trials?
just stop you for a minute? Because let these guys finish.
Okay.
I'm going to have a couple of words and then I'm going to throw the floor open. So bear with me just 2 minutes.
Paul. Yeah. Sorry, can I just say one?
Yes, of course.
Sorry. Just very kind of small point about, you know, like if we're young, do we need the vaccine? So there's two things to it. So my answer will obviously be yes. And one is because we don't know how someone who is young is going to respond to getting ill. I think you're right, you could be completely asymptomatic, have nothing happen to you, you got a bit of a cold, or you could be 18 and end up in a hospital. So, but we want to avoid that. We don't want any 18-year-old to end up in a hospital, and that is why we have, you know, we're saying, hey, get vaccinated, you're much more likely to avoid serious disease by doing that. And the second is, so now there is a little bit of research that's come out, it's quite a recent, I think, paper, that shows that in unvaccinated group of people, you have more viral load. So it takes longer for your body to kind of deal with the virus, which also means that they are more likely to have more mutations. So that when we change all these kind of the viral mutations, they're much more likely to come from unvaccinated group. That is not me saying that just because you're unvaccinated, you're not causing, you know, mutations for the rest of them, but they are more likely to come. There's a bit of research to show that in unvaccinated, there's more likely to be a mutation. So in order for us to control this pandemic, you know, we've created these vaccines. They're not perfect, they're getting better, and, you know, research is ongoing, and they will constantly get better. But we've created these to kind of, reduce the death, reduce serious disease, and also to stop further mutations as much as we can. Viruses mutate, we can't really stop that. But, you know, if you're vaccinated, you're much more likely to clear that infection quickly, and that might stop some of the serious mutations kind of like basically coming about and then spreading.
Thank you. And once again, I'm going to thank Zainab for being brave enough to sit here and really inform us about the work that you do and the way that you're doing, and you're doing it, and what you need to see change. It's a really, really brave position to be taken in this conversation, and I have all respect for you. Anybody else here on the panel want to say anything more? We've got to a point where we were talking about hopes and aspirations, so that's really what I would like to hear about. What is the conversation we need to be having? Who do we need to be having it with, and what is it that we want them to know? Because we started from a position that this scenario actually gives us an opportunity to rewrite the book on the service that we want to see from public health. If we're not happy with it, what do we want to see? What do we want it to do? That's also a question for the audience, which has grown beautifully in the last 40 minutes. Thank you. So, yeah, have a think about that. And, yeah, we will. There are people that we would like to put it to, so it's an important question. It's not just a kind of nice to do. We are doing work here with some intention. Lizzie, Pamela, that end of the room. Anything to say?
I don't have the answer to this question, but I think it's an important question to ask ourselves. But I was just thinking about like health in general and how it's not just about one thing. It's not just about getting sick. It's about how we feel emotionally, it's about our mental health, it's about everything, and all of those things play into how we feel when we get sick. And so I just really don't think it's that simple of this getting a vaccine or not getting a vaccine. And I think that there are lots of herbal things that we can do to make ourselves better, and there is a whole natural world out there that can support us, and I think we're really out of touch with that at the moment. And I think that could also be playing into all of this as well, and the lack of trust that we have that our bodies can actually recover as well, because I think there's a lot of fear that's being shown on the news about people getting COVID and kind of how it's going to take over our system, and that would play into a fear of why people would get the vaccine or not get the vaccine, and there's just so much fear everywhere on like both sides and all around us, and yeah, I just wonder if we're not trusting our bodies to handle it, and kind of how where we are as a society. I think we're actually quite sick as a society, mentally and emotionally, and yeah, in all these different ways. And I kind of feel like we do need to take that into consideration when we're talking about health issues of any kind, and kind of like where that plays a role in the pandemic as well, and COVID, and how does that affect everything else, because everything is connected and interlinked.
Yeah, no, I think that's. Oh, Pamela.
I was going to say, going back to what you said earlier, Lizzie, how we know when we're like ill and like we should listen to our body more. I feel like when you're ill and you go to the hospital and you may not know what it is, but they give you like your diagnosis and like what you should get for it, but you mentioned like a holistic way of dealing with it, it's dismissed straight away. And I've been in the situations where the medical professional is telling you no straight to your face, and it's like that's where you lose trust as well, because there's methods where you can help yourself that's been in your family for generations or back in your country, and someone's dismissing it like that. It kind of plays a role in how you want to, like in your thought process. And like again, it goes back to the vaccine again, like there may be holistic ways, but it's not spoken about, or will never be spoken about, because that's not the way society wants you to like move forward with not getting the narrative of not getting the vaccine.
Thank you, Pamela. I think you kind of brought us to a point where there are at least three things here that I think we can carry forward, and then we're going to hand it over to the audience. So, the importance of finding that faith in your own knowing and being able to access that. So really, after a system that has perhaps invited us not to be in control of our own health and our own bodies, that we are now in a position where we recognise that we need to build a stronger relationship with our bodies to understand it. Whatever we choose to do, vaccine-wise or not, there's still something that is underpinning that. To be listened to, I think is something that is also coming out here. So whatever conversation you're in about your health, you want to feel that you are listened to, and the information that you have to share is one value. And then I think just sort of recognising how everything is interconnected. So as soon as you start talking about we've got lots of natural resources that can help us and support us, and Rihánna's point about being self-organised about your approach to health. Again, really, they're all really important things, and there is not an either or, there is not a right or wrong in any of this. That's just not happening in this room. So it's like there's a combined effort perhaps that we can all get to and get behind. I think there was something about, maybe I'm looking at you because I think it's an anthropological question. I think there is something about that transition to partnership at the very least, but certainly, partnering with your health professionals around what you need and expecting that to be a conversation in which you are an equal, perhaps. So haven't got to that point, it's kind of 6:10 and I probably ought to get out into the rain again, the struggle to get on the bus or whatever it is that you have to do. So, audience, lovely audience, you've heard a masses of intelligence and information and some great ideas, great ways forward. Anything you'd like to add or come back on? Please, now is your moment. We can run around. Can we run around with this? No. You're going to have to stand up and shout.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's fine. It's fine. Anybody would like to say something?
I'm with the language thing. I'm with the language of hesitant.
Right.
I'm with the language of resistant.
So you're not with the language?
No, I'm not. I'm not with it. No, because for me, it's fear has been branded around, and people have accepted the vaccination, I think, because of fear. And if you don't have it, it's you're hesitant. You're this, you're that. Why can't you just be a fully functioning, organised person in your own right, making a decision for yourself based on exposure? So, for example, your immune system works through exposure, right? So if we don't get exposed to anything, we don't build our immune system, right? So no, please tell me, I don't know. I'm just guessing this
yes,
now.
But I mean, a vaccine, that's what the vaccine's doing. It's just exposing you to a part of the virus without hopefully making you very ill. So instead of saying, and also remember, like, there's many different vaccines, so they're all constructed differently. I'm talking about just COVID-19 and the most common ones. So they're just giving you a bit of the outside of the virus. You know, they're like, hey, they put in your body. So your body then produces an immune response, has the antibody, so that when you are exposed, hopefully, you might not even realize it, that you're infected, because as soon as it comes in your body, you have these antibodies and they'll go in overdrive and they neutralize it, and that's it. And you might get like a day of being ill, or you might not, or you might get a week. Like, we don't know. Everyone's very different.
Okay, so can I just say, so with the COVID, so we don't know how long it had actually been moving around. So for example, when we were going through this process of vaccinating people, wouldn't it have been a more sensible thing to actually check whether people had antibodies?
They were checking if they had antibodies.
So, well, before
so
they had the vaccine.
That was in the trial was tested.
No, I'm not talking about in the trial, I'm talking about the general public.
Yeah.
They weren't tested whether they had COVID antibodies.
So firstly, the cost of doing that is really expensive. To test everyone over a time course to see if, so that like I look at whether people have antibodies. These experiments can be laborious, they're time consuming, they are expensive. We can't do it for everyone. The second thing is it doesn't matter, because it's now been shown that after about 3 to 4 months, your antibodies decline. Like, there's literally, like, if you look at the graph, they go down like this after about 3-4 months. So that is where your vaccination comes in. So I'm someone, by the way, who got COVID in March. Like, as soon as it first came, I was ill with it. I was part of a trial in my job that was looking at my antibodies, and they were looking at it, and I had like really nice antibodies, and I was so happy about it. 3 months later, I could see the decline, and this is like way before all the vaccine stuff was coming out. So then you had the vaccines and they push it back up. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep it on a level which keeps you protected, because even if you were to get ill, we don't know how long your antibodies are going to stay. Roughly we know that's about 3 to 4 months, and then they start to decline.
But even when you get a vaccine, you can still
You're just pushing
decline,
it back up,
and then you can still decline.
which is why then you get another vaccine.
Right, and so you just keep getting vaccines, so...
But we do that for flu, it's not new. We've been
No,
doing it for flu.
not everybody has to have a flu jab, for example.
But
a lot of people don't have flu jabs
yeah.
because it makes them ill. Like my mum, she's 88.
Mhm.
It makes her ill, so she stopped having it about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just trying to work out
of course.
like what you're saying, because in some sense the vaccine's still then, you have to keep having vaccine after vaccine after vaccine.
Mhm.
So if your body then goes down and then you have a booster, well, what if you've had COVID, your body goes down and then you catch it again, then obviously your immune system kicks in, so you get the same, so it's the same effect, isn't it?
The thing is, you don't know if you're going to be ill when you catch it. Like, the thing is, one person might be okay, but we don't know when it's 60 million people or 100 million people or the entire kind of world. And, the difference with flu and COVID is that we haven't been in a flu pandemic. I know there was the 2009 flu pandemic, but it didn't affect people in the same way. We are in this is a pandemic. It's ended up globally. We've had more death than flu combined for like quite a few years. A flu, by the way, is really dangerous as well. So I'm all for like flu vaccines as well.
I'm with you. I worry about this use of the word illness as if that is a problem to humans. We become ill because we're human. It's natural, isn't it, for us to be ill? And the idea that actually being ill shouldn't be, or selling something that is going to cure all illness. It takes, I don't know, we stop being human then, don't we? Because actually part of being human is to be ill sometimes. Yeah. It's a fact of life. That's why your body works in the way that it does, right? There are some illnesses, yes, that are actually really detrimental to
COVID for a lot of people.
Well, for a lot of people,
everyone.
but actually, what are the figures? I mean, I've looked at the figures, and I have to say, in terms of what do you mean, in terms of the 66 million population in the UK? I mean,
so I think I don't want to go down.
No, I know. I'm just saying.
I really
I mean,
sorry.
No, but globally,
control you.
Control me. You control me.
We are talking about millions and millions of deaths globally, right? So would
how many people globally exist? Though?
I know, but would we have this opinion if it was? Would I have your opinion if it was my mum who died, or if it was my sister who died, or if it was my brother or my kid? I probably wouldn't. I would do everything to have. You can't project that
onto me that whether I would have that opinion.
I'm
sorry.
Out of the rabbit hole. Has anybody got any other response to? Because I really do want to come out of this session with some clear. This is what we would like to see, because that is where we can make the difference. We cannot make the difference in having a rabbit hole conversation.
No, I'm not trying to.
So let's focus. I'm going to make you focus.
I'll completely focus. So, for example, what this young woman was saying about your natural health, right, and actually sort of history and your family's history about how you heal yourself, the relationship between your mind and your body is really key. Yeah. If you're an anxious person and you're stressed, well, you know that shingles can be stress and all of that. So how does your body then function if you're not fully whole? So I think that a lot of things has to be considered.
At this moment, give me something that you want to see happen differently in how we access public health, or how public health approaches us. Think about it for a minute while I go around the room and ask the same question. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'd like to see a change in how our government, like we were talking about with the booster jabs and texts and the text from the government you receive. My grandma is 78 and she had TB a few years ago, before the pandemic, and she is scared shitless of going outside. She won't, she's old now. And sorry. And I don't want to see her last years of her just, she hasn't left the house since the pandemic started. And that's quite hard for me to see, and to see her just be just awfully scared of doing anything. I'd like to see a change in how you can ease out the older generation and reassure them that there is light at the end of this.
Okay, so that's an amazing point to make, and I think it's the older generation, but to me, I'm interested in that. It's about how we remove fear and replace that with a level of careful conversation and careful holding of something which is very difficult, which allows people to find their own way through it, and life doesn't stop. So what we're saying is we recognise that we cannot move forward if there's an expectation that we are constantly poked by the fear stick behind us. So the fear stick has got to go and be replaced by something which is more open, more nurturing. Right, okay. Yeah,
Like,
that's great. Thank you.
I was going to say, has your grandma been less fearful in like recent weeks? Have you noticed a difference?
I mean, not so much, but she watches a lot of TV.
Yeah.
Now that there's a global war going on.
Yeah, and she's going to say maybe the absence of that kind of media has made her kind of not think about it so much. Like, but you haven't noticed a difference.
No, when they released when they ended the restrictions, she sent this message saying, "Oh, I'm terrified. I think it's too early." I don't think it's done anything, to be honest.
I completely agree with your point. I think a lot of and what you were saying as well, a lot of the campaigning has been like fear and plus intense. Like there were, adverts of like people breathing these black particles over people and like you could kill your dad, like things, really quite fear-mongering advertising. And I think that a lot of, I've got friends who are immunocompromised, I've got friends who completely rolled away with we've got kids who haven't socialised this whole time. So I think that, I think it all builds on personal anxieties, and we do need some sort of, like this conversation, I hope I have hand up, hat off, I don't know what I say to all of you. I think it's really brave for you all to sit here and host this conversation. But I think this sort of like conversation where we're all talking in a careful way is very useful. I feel like Binky said, I've learned a lot more tonight than, because actually people who are scared of what's going on, it's really hard to have a measured conversation because this gets very heated, because a lot of us have been affected, people have died, people are still unwell with COVID. So it is a really emotional issue, but it's just been fought with fear concepts and then just pulling things away, which makes people who are vulnerable being taught that you can't go out. Yeah, so I agree. So, thank you both. Back to
Doc, is this a man-made vaccination?
Yes.
Right. Is the sickness a man-made?
Sorry?
Is COVID a man-made thing?
No.
So where did it come from?
So viruses mutate all the time. So at some point it was a virus that was in animals, it mutated and became pathogenic to humans. Just like, by the way, like pretty much all different viruses that come. Yeah. So that's why like flus are like swine flu, bird flu, because animals quite often have viruses that are not dangerous to us, but because viruses constantly mutate, at some point one mutation becomes infectious to humans, and then that's it. But sometimes they die with that one person, nothing happens to that person, or they get very ill. But something like this, it just happened that one mutation was infectious to a human being, and then it was also very infectious. So then it spread 1 to 2, 2 to 4, and then I think we know the rest.
And it jumped straight across the whole globe?
It just jumped. Yeah, but I mean, look, we live in a really globalized world now. It takes one person to take a flight, and the entire plane can be infected, or the moment that you land and you do cough, and And this is the thing, I know that obviously seeing those kind of air droplets and things like that, they're scary. I completely understand that, but it's also, but I don't fully agree with everything, like the way the government's kind of done. But you know, how else do we communicate that? Like, hey, wear your mask. Like, I don't, you know, so we have to kind of show visually, because that's why they have those posters, because they're going, like, literally, when you are coughing, you can, you know, if I cough now, I could probably infect quite a lot of people in the audience, and you guys. So that's the only way they can kind of show that, and say, like, you should wear your mask. And I think that's why they were kind of doing it, to be like, to kind of get people to visualize it, I guess.
All right. So you're saying to me this virus just appeared from an animal to humans?
Yes, I mean, so coronaviruses have existed. Some of the colds are coronaviruses as well. In the past, we've had SARS. You know, we've had MERS, and
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I've heard, or I've picked up from the media, blah, 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 I've done my little homework. Certain people in the world are behind this. True or false?
I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I'm gonna go ahead and say false, because there's been no real evidence to suggest that there's certain people. I think some of that whether also stems from like racism against certain countries. So I don't think all of that is, you know, and I mean, we'll say, like, you know, it came that, you know, the whole, it's been created in the Chinese labs. I don't know how much of that comes from racism. Just, you know, you need a narrative, you need the villain in this. Like, let's blame the country that it started, which, by the way, could have been any country. It just happened to be that country. You know, the pandemic, the flu pandemic, came from the US, but we don't talk about that. So, you know, I think, so, but I don't know, because I don't work in that lab. I don't know if it could have been created. As far as I'm aware, generally to create viruses is not a legal activity. You can't go and start mutating and creating, but could these happen in theory? Yes, but I would say it's probably false.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've got 2 minutes left, and there's a young man here that wants to ask a question.
So you know how a lot of viruses always come from animals? Do humans usually test them on animals and certain viruses, and where it comes from exactly for big vaccines for animals?
So are we healing our animals? I think that's a really good point.
Sorry, could you repeat it?
Are we healing the animals?
Do you want to stand up? You don't have to.
And also, like, so like how animals are usually the cause of viruses spreading, and also can it also be the same thing for plants, because they also kind of live in.
So it's how far back the chain can we start to address what we do? And I think that's an amazingly expansive place to end and yet begin something else. So thank you. Do you want to, can you answer that really quickly?
Yeah, so there's a whole field of science that looks at when you have, we look at the genetics of the virus and where it comes from, and then they trace it back to animals and what's different. So that's kind of how we know they come from animals. As far as I'm aware, we don't create vaccines for animals, because if your animals were to get a certain disease and they think that it could affect humans, they generally kill livestock, or and also death in animals is not considered, you know, like they're not going to spend a lot of money creating, it's like you kind of kill the animals essentially, but we wouldn't do that with humans. So that's, you know, why we create vaccines for humans. Sorry, what's the second part? I didn't know. I don't actually know the answer. I don't think as far as I'm aware, there's not viruses that jump from plants to humans. Because the way that with animals is different. We, as societies, we live very closely with animals. Generally, they get spread from, we obviously have them as pets. We eat, like a lot of people eat animals. We live within animals. So we tend to have a closer relationship. And also animals are closer in kind of their genetic material than a plant. So I don't think there is. The only reason I'm hesitant to say it is because, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to probably say there isn't. I can't think of an example where it's jumped.
Okay, can I just go to Juliet?
Oh, yeah.
Then we're going to come back to changes that we want to see, and then we're going to have to go because we'll be thrown out.
Well, first of all, I guess I'd like to say, so Binky and I have worked closely on the Grassroots Project with some voluntary organisations, this obviously being one of them. And so a massive thank you, because I think, like you said, just being there and talking about your experience is a really great thing to do. I think one of the key things is probably communication and information that's really massive in this, and trust. And so how do we have the right communication with people to build that trust? Because ultimately it's about self-autonomy and making that decision for yourself. I don't think anyone can tell anybody what to do around their own bodies. I think that's something we all have to do for ourselves. But giving the right information is key to that happening. So I think that's the kind of most important thing. So I think your points earlier about how do we get the information out there, not to convince, not to persuade, but so that people can make that decision for themselves, not to guilt and fear, but just for their own autonomy. And I think that's probably a really important thing.
Brilliant, thank you. Juliet, thank you for being here. It's really important that you heard all of this.
I initially just want to echo that. I think the solution is a communicated choice. And I think everyone has kind of touched on it, especially mentioning we should just have the choice whether we want to take it or not. It should be respected. And the idea of self-autonomy, if choice is communicated, then people can live with the consequences, knowing that. Because as you say, there is a level of transparency out there, but I think because there's mistrust, you can have all the information in the world, but if you don't trust where the source of the information, you can give me all the information, but I don't trust it, so ultimately, it's not going to, what you're trying to force down and what I'm receiving, I'm not going to take in, and my choice is going to be influenced by that. So I think, I think it's I put communicating choice, but also alleviate restrictions, which I don't think will necessarily happen, but the idea of and I understand why, but not being able to travel to certain countries or not being access into certain places if you don't have the vaccine. Pub and pubs to a certain extent, but it's just understanding of communicated choice, I think, and that's where it does come down to you as an art director kind of thinking about the advertising of how do you communicate choice whilst preserving the transparency, and that it's just that. But of course the only thing is that there's a reason why choice isn't being communicated, I think, because there is an agenda. And I don't know what the agenda is personally, but you mentioned earlier, why would a healthy 18-year-old who has
who's had COVID as well, survived it, why would they need the vaccine?
Why would they need it, right? I think, and maybe you can talk to this as a scientist, but is it because you wanna test? Okay, if they are, why? How is it going to affect that person?
I'm afraid
so that
we
you can help the next.
Poor old Zainab, she's done her bit.
Honestly,
just because we don't know that if there was another strain, would they react exactly the same way? So you could get COVID and be completely fine, but there could be a different strain that's circulating and you get it and you're not okay and you do end up in a hospital. And maybe you don't, but maybe you just have really miserable 2 weeks of being ill, and but we can avoid it. We can make that, if we can make that 2 weeks into 3 days of just being a little bit unwell, let's go for that. And we don't know what the long-term, we're talking a lot about the long-term effects of vaccines. we don't necessarily know the long-term effects of COVID. There's a lot of people with long COVID. There's a lot of people who, 3 months down the line, they don't know if they can smell things the same way, which may seem like, but like that's your life. That's changed. But
I'm going to have to go because we'll really be thrown out any minute. But I think we're going to have to do this again, Juliet, aren't we? Yeah, we are building trust. Word by word, communication by communication. I'm going to say a big thank you. Big, brave, bold panel with great ideas. I think we were just getting to the point where we were going into an expansive conversation. I love the question that you asked. I'm really interested in it, and it's probably another project, but I'm really interested in what happens actually if we do start to look at healing the animals, so therefore maybe the disease doesn't ever get to us because we're healing the animals. I think that's off the scale brilliant. I'm really happy with that one. Thank you all for coming, and will you come again, and when you bring your friends, because as you can say, it's a massive conversation. We've only just got going. It takes time for everybody to warm up. But come again, please, because it's an important one, and I do believe that if we work together and keep talking, we can actually affect change. And we're all talking about autonomy, so let's actually grab it and do something about this. So if we haven't got your details, please leave your emails on the way out, and we can just keep you up to date with what we're doing. Okay. Thank you, everybody.